one should be a notebook. Now, there's some conjecture about the format of that notebook. If you're working in a private capacity, your notebook is your own. Okay, what I will say to you is keep your notebook, give it a number. Okay, when you finish with it, put it away somewhere that's secure and that you'll be able to access later. Okay, when you work for government departments and the cops and all those sort of things, they give you notebooks that are called accountable books. They've got a number, they come out of a register, you fill them in and give them back. You can do your own system as a private investigator, and I'd suggest that you do that. Have some consistency. Okay, your notebook shouldn't just be a little thing from Smiggle, although there's nothing wrong with that. But have some consistency. Buy a heap of good notebooks. Doesn't matter whether they're big pocket ones, whatever works for you. Okay, you've got to remember your notes are your notes. Okay, I'm not here to say you must have a notebook. It must be this size. They're your notes. Okay, how you write in it is up to you. But we'll talk a bit today about the best ways to keep and write notes. What I will say, 4 words that will ring true and I want to remain in your mind, is notes will save you. Okay, notes that you take about things in detail will not only save you in terms of giving evidence later, or preparing statements or writing reports, they can save you from complaints and all sorts of stuff. Okay, if you've worked in any government organisations, you will know that. Okay, so be a good note taker, okay, and take good notes. I'm just going to pose a question, and please give me feedback online. What do you think every notebook entry, whether it doesn't matter what it's about, whether it's talking to a witness, talking to a suspect, visiting a scene, doesn't matter, you take notes anyway, what should every single notebook entry start with? Have a bit of a think about that for a minute, because I'll tell you what it should start with, and if you can get into this practice, it'll make you a good professional note taker. So have a think about 3 things there are that every note entry you make should start with. Just take a couple of, or a minute to have a think about that. Three things. All right, Tom, what do you reckon?
Time, date.
Time, date. There's 2 things. You got a third one?
Place.
Close. Oh, he's killed it. Hey, straight up. Okay. What? Anyone else have any suggestions, Paul?
Yeah, we had date, time,
Good.
and person, but yes, but normally your initial is date, time, place, and then
time, date, place,
Yep.
every entry. Okay, that's relevant to everything you're doing. What time is it? What's the date? And where are you? The rest will all be people's names and all that other stuff. Fine. So time, date, place, every entry. Get into that habit of doing that, and you'll come across as a very professional investigator and note taker. And we'll talk a little bit more about the structure of notes a bit later, okay? All right, let's talk about recording and maintaining notes. I'll just go back. We've just got a quick video to show you. Paul, you're right there. So a short video there about notes, and one thing that I did want to bring to your attention is what contemporaneous notes mean, okay? It did described in that video. So it is important to know to get your head around what is a contemporaneous note. So it is a note made at or near the time of whatever it is that you're investigating or talking to or whomever. Okay. Why is that important? Well, because, you know, if you think about it, if you went and talked to someone today and next month you made a notebook entry about it, is your memory as good next month as it is as today or maybe tomorrow? No, it's not. So that's why notes made contemporaneously are very important. Look, good note takers will take contemporaneous notes, and that's what we want you to do as an investigator, is keep good notes. Now, some of you may be sitting there now taking good notes. Some people take furious notes, pages and pages. Some just dot point. Some take none. Okay. Look, I'm here to say I wasn't a great note taker, so it's a bit of do as I say, not as I do. But as a good investigator, you will always take good detailed notes to your satisfaction. Okay, contemporaneously. So something happens today, you take some notes today or tomorrow, where it's still fresh in your mind. That way you can also rely on those notes. They're good evidence and they're reliable to use for your statement or your report or whatever it is you're doing, court particularly, later. So if you have to give evidence in court and your memory is not that good, so for PIs, if you're involved in some sort of matter, you may be giving court 12, 18 months, gee, lo and behold, years and years after something you've investigated. So you're going to need to rely on those good notes you took at the time. If you didn't take them at the time, well, their reliability is in question and you may not be able to use them. So, okay. So using official notebooks to record original notes relating to incidents and occurrences in appropriate format and time frame. Okay, I'm not really here to tell you the exact way for you to take notes. Again, they are your notes. How you write. Some people can write shorthand. Some people like dot points. What I will say is there are a couple of things that you need to note if you're writing in your notebook. One is don't leave big blocks of blank space. Now, why? That's right, yeah. Tom just said things can be added, okay? That's right, and if you've finished the particular incident entry that you're making notes about, best practice, rule off right underneath, or even from the last letter. Again, if you leave blocks, well, it leaves you open to, well, what else did you put in later? You know what I mean? So good practice to have. Don't leave big blocks. Official notebooks, you know, can get issued to investigators. I mean, you know, you can jump online to a security store and buy your own investigator notebook if you so wish. Up to you, okay? We'll just go to Officeworks and get something that works for you. If numbered, yeah, well, numbered's good if you can get it. No, look, it's not absolutely necessary for an investigator. It's just, again, it is professional. If they're numbered, the security ones that they sell are typically numbered, yeah. Just be consistent. That's what I guess I'm saying with the notebook that you choose. Or if you're employed by an a firm, they'll probably give them to you. You need to be aware of the organisation's policy and procedures in relation to notebooks. So again, you'd have to be employed by a firm for this. But like any government organisation, they'll issue you a notebook. It'll have a number reference on it. You use it, you fill it out, you give it back. It goes through a register and then gets stored for the 7 years or whatever it is. Come up with your own system for that. Official notebooks should be, again, best practice, numbered, page numbered. We don't rip pages out. So when I said get what notebook works for you, try not to get the ones with the rippable pages out. Because again, you could rip anything out there, and why do you want to open yourself up to that, okay? Don't skip pages. We don't use whiteout. They should just get rid of it. You can still buy it, but we don't use it, particularly as an investigator. If you make a mistake in your notebook, rule a line through it and initial it. That's all common sense stuff, I think. All of this stuff is to, you know, not leave you open to being dodgy, and that's not what we're here to do, is, you know, to produce dodgy investigators. We're here to teach you how to be professional and give you the best practice. Notes that meet content and sequencing requirements within time frames. Okay, when making a notebook entry, should be clear and concise, but again, they're your notes, okay? So it's up to you, the detail that you put into it. Time, date, place, who, what, where, when and how is a good place to start. So we've said already, every entry, time, date, place, and then who, what, where, when, why, okay? Keep in mind how this would sound, your notes, if it would be read out in court. Now, it's not necessary that you would be reading your notes out verbatim in court. They would simply be an aid memoir to refresh your memory, okay? But you want to have your notes structured in such a way that you can read them out, okay? You don't want to be sitting in the court or witness box later, you know, in years to come and go, oh gee, I can't even read what I've written. It looks pretty embarrassing, okay? So spend, you know, that little bit of time. Okay, in Australia, generally information like notebooks should be retained for 7 years, okay? That does vary a bit. And certainly if it's for court, you know, retain it to the end of the court proceedings. But if you're in a PI business, I'd suggest coming up with something like, you know, try and file your notebooks in one of those plastic things for 7 years. Have a register in there, and when they're finished 7 years, you can destroy them, or you could scan them electronically, whatever you come up with. Clients will request sometimes that you keep notebooks for a certain amount of time, and that can be more than 7 years, or it depends on who you're working for and who your client is. Okay, so using notes to make statements or write reports are very important because they form the basis sometimes of your report writing. Okay, they refresh your memory, and they can be used as an exhibit. So if you were to go to a court or tribunal, you'd always take your original notebook with you. Okay, and again, it's going to be very difficult for you to rely on those notes unless they were taken contemporaneously. So unless they were taken at or near the time of the incident. So you might be asking, what does at or near the time mean? It doesn't mean you need to, you know, sit down furiously and write notes a minute after you've finished what's happened, okay? It does depend on the circumstances. Could be that night, next day. Next week's probably stretching it, although if it was something quite serious, maybe not. Few weeks, months, you're getting very old, okay? So as an example, I witnessed a car accident, pretty bad car accident, motorbike versus a car 2 weeks ago on the Gold Coast, right in front of me. Poor bugger, I think he had a compound fracture. I probably didn't sit down and write some notes about that until the 2 days afterwards. So you could argue, was that contemporaneous? I'd say it probably was. It was still fairly fresh in my mind. If I was doing it now, less fresh in my mind, less reliable, okay? Seriousness of the accident, all sorts of things can be in place there. So contemporaneous notes allows a witness to refer to the notes in court, if with leave of the court, of course. And about notes in a brief of evidence, I'm not sure why that's written, but no, we don't put notes in a brief of evidence. You're not really doing briefs of evidence unless you're working as an investigator in, you know, government department and so forth. You don't need to put your notes in your reports, okay? Remember, they are your notes. So they're for you to write your reports and refresh your memory. Maintaining receipts and things like bank records. So again, we talked a bit in the last session about exhibits. So a receipt for something you might have gathered as evidence, a bank record, a document, whatever, they're all exhibits. Remember I talked to you about that chain of evidence, about that sort of thing? Well, again, you need to maintain that chain of evidence and make sure it's not broken. It's always preferable as well, and when you're working as a entry-level investigator, what the big companies will give you, you'll get a note, electronic notification that you've got a job to do. You'll go in, you'll see what's to be done, and everything you do, statements, receipts, photos, can all generally, most companies, you're able to scan them into or upload them into the system there. So that's pretty good as well. Okay, just talking a bit about statements. Now, statements aren't necessarily your notes, but they are actual statements in relation to, you know, whatever you're doing. We do have another subject where we talk more in detail about statements, so don't worry too much about that. but court procedure rules when formatting statements is up to you. So in doing your statement as an investigator, it's going to depend on what you're doing it for. So if you're doing it for a legal claim, you'll be guided by the lawyer that's dealing with it. If you're doing it for a government department, you might have a set format. It's really up to you. There's lots of different formats. You don't need to worry too much about the formats of them. Bank records and receipts and that need to show things like amounts withdrawn, etc. Don't worry about that. So using notes to give evidence. So I talked again about contemporaneous notes and why they have to be contemporaneous to give evidence. So you can use your notes to refresh your memory, and you should always take your notebook with you if you're going to court. 3 elements that make a witness statement valuable is that something was observed, why you remembered it, and being able to communicate about the observation. So when you're observing something, say for example, we watched earlier that dog attack video. If you were to sit down and take notes about that now, I wonder how many of you would remember certain things about colours of cars, directions, amount of people, descriptions and that sort of thing. So you can see that if you had done that directly after, how that might differ from now, okay? But your observations as an investigator, particularly when you're doing things like slips and falls and insurance matters, are really important, and you should note them in your notebooks. Okay, as I said, they're only allowed to be referred to in courts if they're made at or near the time. Requesting authority of presiding official to refer to notes while giving evidence. So this is, all you need to know about this is that if you are going to use your notes when you're giving evidence, if you ever have to, you need to seek leave of the court, which again, you'll typically be given. You need your official notebook, and you need to be able to probably satisfy the court that they were taken contemporaneously. Okay. Presenting factual, correctly sequenced evidence that reflects information in notes. So they can only be used to reflect a witness's memory. Okay, and it wouldn't be the case that you'd be up there just reading out your notes, although if it's a prosecutor or defence solicitor, plaintiff or whatever, may allow you to do that, that's okay. Presentation standards. This is about presenting evidence, okay. I don't know what this has really got to do with taking notes, but anyway, let's talk about that. If you ever have to give evidence in court, there are certain things which you need to know. We may go about showing you, certainly in later lectures, a bit about court protocol. So you'll need to know that. And the court can be a very daunting place if you don't know who's who and what's going on there. Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. For some reason, they've got these criteria in this unit about employee presentation standards for court. It is interesting they've got it because there is a separate unit that totally looks at how we present evidence in court. So I wouldn't worry about it too much now. We're going to learn all about that in that unit. So
that's right. So I mean, just know there's court protocol is very strict. It's a very formal place generally. Tribunals like QCAT and other administrative tribunals are a little less formal, but there's still courts as well. Again, we'll go into a lot more about that protocol later. And that's not to say you may even never give evidence in court, but at least if you do, you'll know sort of the order that it follows and how a court case goes and who's making the decision and who's that, and etc. Okay, so compiling your reports is quite an important thing to do. Okay, you must spend quite a bit of time on your report writing. Now, some of you it may not be the strength. You know, I talked about strengths and weaknesses yesterday. It may not be your strength, but if you're going to be a professional investigator, you need to know how to compile your reports properly. You need to know, grammar and spelling, as simple as that sounds, because clients particularly pick up on those things very easy. If you've been working on a report for days and it's quite detailed, you'll be amazed at how many grammar and spelling mistakes and inaccuracies you make in your report. So, little tip, get someone else to read it. Get your partner to read it, proofread it if you can, until you get a bit better at it anyway. So doing your reports is about analysing all the information you've gathered. Okay, and remember, we report on the evidence. Typically we don't put a lot in about opinion, although some companies, some clients do require opinions about things. Just got to remember, as an investigator, if you're going to give an opinion in a report, that's fine, but what's it based on? It's not just because I didn't like you. I went out and interviewed and you weren't a very nice person. You know, it'd have to be, no, I don't believe that person is telling the truth. This is why A, B, C or D. Because this, what they've said, is not consistent with what the other witness or not consistent with the evidence or something like that. Got to remember, everything we do, everything we report on as professional investigators has got to be based on the evidence. Is it relevant? Again, is it admissible in court? And has all the evidence been collected to cover the elements or the client's instructions? So again, we go back to this scope. What have they asked you to do, which is part of your planning? And when you're doing your report, have you covered off everything that they've asked? So again, as a new investigator doing a job for a big firm, they'll say, go and interview this person, he or she is the claimant. Then here are 3 witnesses, and here is the claimant's supervisor. Then take some pictures of where X happened. That's what they'll tell you to do. That's your plan. So you go out and do that. You analyse, you take all the information, you interview the people, you take the pictures, you load them all up, you do your report. You just got to check off that that's what the client asked for and no more. Okay. And arrange it in a clear picture for the client. So again, investigative reports, it's no good trying to make yourself sound smart. Most clients just want to read simple, objective, factual reports based on the evidence. That's all they really want. So formatting styles to meet the organisation. So again, you work for some of those bigger companies, they'll tell you how to write it. Okay, they'll give you the formatting style. Follow that. Don't think, oh no, I can do better than that. That's the way they want it. That's the way their clients want it. So stick with that. If you're working for yourself, how you report is up to you. I mean, I've got my own reports, the way I do things, and they work for me. And they work for my clients as well. So follow the organisational formats for the standard of report. Some some have their own formats, and that's fine. And this goes without saying, but a report consists of title, obviously, who does it, summary. Lots of times in investigation reports, executive summary is really important. So what an executive summary is basically a 1-page overview of everything. Okay, so someone can read that 1 page without reading the whole report and know everything that's happened. Okay, body, conclusion, discussion, etc. Recommendations, annexures. Most reports have annexures. Okay, again, professional investigators will spend a lot of time making sure what they give to their client is kosher and looks good, easily read, is professional, and doesn't have grammar and spelling issues. Incident reports. Also, talk about safety incidents. This is just, tick and flick type things. One of the main reasons for completing reports to an organisation's template is so it can be stored. So they've got a particular style, the way they do things that their clients is happy with. You need to maintain that. Okay. Adhering to privacy and security within the organisation aligns with the organisation's policy procedures. We've talked a bit about that already. So just before I go on and we have a bit of a talk about the short answer questions, is there any queries about taking notes? I think I've been pretty clear about the sorts of things that you need to take good notes. Just remember time, date, place, and who, what, where, when, why, how. The detail of what you do, that's really up to you. As I said, some people are really good. They take very detailed notes to the nth degree, and some are quite brief. Whatever works for you is the thing. But don't go about your role as an investigator not taking any notes. Okay, you should all have a notebook. And it's very important to keep track of that notebook. Make sure it doesn't have big gaps. Rule pages off. Write detail that you need in there in relation to whatever it is you're investigating. There's nothing wrong with having a notebook and putting a plan. If you're doing a traffic accident or something, you can draw a plan in your notebook. That may refresh your memory to actually do a proper. Josh.
Check this step for me.
Mate, I'm in the middle of fucking class.
Do you not have time?
No, I'm teaching.
Oh, whatever.
Sorry. Sorry about that. Can you go and talk with him, Paul? Ta. All right, let's look at the short answer questions. Before we do that, however, that was all a mock, okay? Now, he came in, said certain things to me, I said certain things to him. Here's your first notebook exercise. Something's happened that you've witnessed. So you're going to take some notes about that for yourself, okay? Because later you might be asked to put in a report or give some evidence in court about what you just saw. So let's see how you go. You know to start with time, date and place. I'll give you 5 or 8 minutes to do that. How much you put in is up to you. Whether you use, and it's always good to use first person, he said, what happened. Descriptions can sometimes be important. Directions, whatever you need. We'll spend 5 to 8 minutes doing that, and we'll have a bit of a chat about how you went. So obviously that was all a mock exercise. Just 1, to see if you're still awake, and 2, if you're paying attention, and 3, give you a bit of a go at taking contemporaneous notes. Okay, so I hope you've all started off with time, date and place firstly, and I hope you've ruled off at the end. That's excuse me, the 2 most important things I'm looking for. I'll throw it out there to anybody. What was his name? I mentioned it. Did anybody pick it up? And you may not have heard it, I realise that. So firstly, what is his name, and how have you described him in your notes? Did you describe him? Would that be important? Okay. What about, I'll throw it open to the class here. Did you describe him?
Yeah, I wrote a young man, 5'8" with ginger hair.
Yep. Looks like Ed Sheeran a bit. Okay. Did you have any information about first person, he said, she said, what it was about, or anything like that?
Yeah, he spoke to you and said, Greg, can you read this?
Yep.
And then you replied, no, I'm busy, I'm teaching. And then he screwed the piece of paper up, threw it on the ground, and then he walked out, and you turned to Paul and asked Paul to speak to him outside.
Okay, cool. Has anybody got anything to add to that? Or some feedback about how you felt doing that exercise, taking those notes? Now the other important thing, of course, is that with note-taking is that note-taking is not only for you, it's for your witnesses and complainants. So, for example, you may be asked to investigate something where you will ring a witness or a complainant and not get to talk to them for days, weeks, or whatever. A very good thing for you as an investigator to say to them is, well, look, in relation to this incident, can you sit down and write out some notes in as much detail as you can about what it is you saw or what happened to you. Okay, they can then use their notes to relay that information back to you, and they can attach them as an annexure to their statement or interview that you're going to do with them. That's quite a common practice, especially if you can't get statements from them straight away, is to ask them to write notes about whatever it is that's happened. Paul, do you have a few questions?
Not too many questions. I've just got it right with Josh. Someone mentioned they felt it was quite intrusive, what happened. Someone thought it was a great exercise. But that's about it at this point in time.
Okay. It's interesting too because let's say, for example, I had you all sit down now and say, can you do a statement? So notes are different to a statement. Notes are your notes. Statement is a formal record that you're going to rely on. And if I said to you now, all sit down and please do your statement in relation to that incident, I could gather up the 16, 18 odd statements and there would all be differences in what his name was, how tall he was, what he was wearing, what he looked like, what he said. Everything would be different. Now, why is that? All see things different? Yeah, that's right. So people's backgrounds, their education, their experience is all different. So people can have a whole room of people see the exact same thing, and there will be subtle differences. I guess my advice to you as an investigator, don't worry about that. You might talk to a couple of different witnesses that, he was wearing a red shirt, next witness blue, white shirt, or he was dark complexion, he had red hair, no, he had blonde hair. It doesn't matter, okay? people see things differently. So you need, as an investigator, you need to accept that. And again, we gather evidence. We don't challenge people about that. Okay. Would be interesting to have. Now, Paul, you had a question too about electronic notes. What was that?
So a couple of people asked about making notes using iPad or even voice to text, possibly, but with notes. Okay. Can you actually make electronic notes?
Absolutely, you can. Nothing wrong with that. And if you type something into OneNote or any of those things, that's contemporaneous notes as well. Contemporaneous doesn't mean written, it just means made at. So typing it into a document, that certainly is contemporaneous. Surveillance operatives, how do you think they take their notes? Because they're busy doing stuff, they're not necessarily sitting around writing stuff. Yeah, that voice recorder, that's right. So contemporaneous notes, which they later go back and listen to and put in their report. Again, nothing wrong, that's contemporaneous, it's good evidence. So yes, you can do all those things. Have a notebook in your pocket, please, as an investigator. You may not use it. You may use OneNote, you may use your iPad, you may use your voice recorder. That's all fine. But there may be times where you need a notebook. That's why I encourage you all to make sure you have that. Okay, so if there aren't any questions, if there are any questions, just keep them coming. Send them through. We can answer them about notes. For me, again, it's an important skill for you to have, and it is a skill. Okay. It does take practice to be able to write good detailed notes, and the better detailed they are, the better you are as an investigator, if that makes sense. Okay, so the last part of this exercise before we move on to the next unit is this scenario, is that you've been working in an office environment in Stark Industries. It's been brought to your attention that somebody's been stealing liquor from the company board. Okay. Now, this exercise, again, it's a template-based exercise, which you can all get up and have a look at. It's been to attach the template for the matter. So the details of the scenario are at the top of the template, and then it's got incident notebook notes. So you can either put these in here or write them out and attach to your thing. You'll notice these notes don't start off with time, date and place. So there's a boo-boo there. So of course we all know what the incident is, who it's been reported to, taken by, etc. And then you'll note that there's just details about what the incident actually was. The next part of this scenario with the template is to use your notes that you've just taken to enable you to complete the template. And that's really, there's nothing to explain there other than fill in the blanks. Okay. You've got, for example, nature of the incident, the theft, what were the causes, who are the stakeholders involved. They're the same sort of things that we've done for the other templates. Again, were any of the following undertaken, you just fill in those based on the scenario that you've done. Okay. The third thing for this particular exercise is to complete an affidavit. Now, if you don't know, I don't mean to tell anybody to suck eggs, but an affidavit is a statement, okay? Just another word for a statement, your statement, or a legal word for a statement. So for example, what court it is, the title, this is what the front of your affidavit / statement will look like. Now you're making this statement from the notes that you've taken about that incident and the template that we've provided. And you'll see here, and I'm glad you've all got this because this is a good example of what a statement from you as a private investigator should and would look like. Okay. Typically, as an investigator, you always start off with a little bit of context about what it is, and that goes straight into the incident. So, for example, the incident that just happened, if you were to go away and make a statement based on the notes that you've just made, you would start off with, in this same format, with, at such and such a date, I went to the Sunshine Coast where, we're talking about the gents in the class here, where they participated in an intensive certificate 3 run by me and Paul at this location, to set the context. Around whatever time, which you would have in your notes, because it's time, date, place, Greg, the presenter, was presenting a thing, whatever it is, and a male walked in from his left, etc., etc., etc. Okay. One thing I will say is this one that we've given you is a good example of how to set out a statement in terms of don't just dump a whole load of information in one. Break it up if you can into segments. Makes it a lot easier. You can have a read through that in your own time and prepare the statement or affidavit that you're going to do as part of this exercise. The rest is just affirmed. And there's lots of different formats for statements, etc. If you ever have to do any as a PI, typically if you're employed by one of the agencies, they'll give you the format to do that. Okay. Again, I guess this is one of these things where it's really important. You're going to be a professional investigator to network. Not only network with your other investigators, like find other investigators, seek them out, talk to them, find them on Facebook. Paul mentioned there's some groups on there. There's lots of good professional organisations out there. The AIPI is one. They're the Australian Institute of Professional Investigators. There's the Australian Association of Workplace Investigators. There's the Australian Association of Mercantile Agents. There's literally a dozen of these sort of groups. Okay, so seek out the ones that you think are going to be good for you. Join up to them. If you can't now as a student, when you get licensed, join up to them, because what you do is you're able to network with other investigators, and they have a whole load of resources on their websites. Anything you need to know, you can find out. So, if you're doing a statement for the first time, when you finally get licensed after this course, I would have absolutely no trouble with you getting in touch with Paul or I and getting some guidance. But any good investigator will do that. Okay, and then there's just more template stuff to fill in relation to that template. I don't think there's anything more I need to talk about that.